Do you follow Paul or Jesus? I've never actually had someone tell me they follow Paul, but I have had a lot of conversations lately where I'll quote something that Jesus, or I call him Yeshua usually, I'll quote something that Yeshua said, and then they'll quote something that Paul said in order to contradict the quote that I just gave them. And then we usually have a pretty good discussion about it, but they usually end in a stalemate because they often see what I'm pointing out to them. They see the problem, that something they're thinking in their head is different than what Jesus or Yeshua actually said. So then they tell me they're going to think about it. But then a month later, we'll have the same exact conversation all over again. And it's not that I need everyone to agree with me, but I just think that if we say we're following Jesus or Yeshua, that we should be doing what he said. So instead of rehashing those arguments that seem to go nowhere, I'm going to try to just point out a few things that I've noticed. And at the very end of the video, I'll show you how it all connects to Psalm 119, because I can connect everything to Psalm 119. So I propose, and I think most people would agree, that Yeshua, or Jesus, is a higher authority than Paul is. And yet most people will defer to Paul over what Yeshua said. So in a future video, I'll discuss the higher authority part, because I think people in theory agree with that part. But I also think he's a better authority. So that's what I'm going to go over today. And by better, I mean when Yeshua says something, it is always so wise that it cuts straight to the heart of the matter, whatever that person that he's talking to is dealing with. And it also, when he quotes the Old Testament, it's always so perfect in its application and enlightening that it's just beautiful. On the other hand, Paul often quotes some really strange sources, and I'll show you a few. And then when he quotes the Old Testament, the context is a little odd. It doesn't seem to exactly apply the same as what the original intent was in the Old Testament. So I'll show you a few of those examples too. So let's start with Yeshua. When he is out in the desert, Satan basically says, he knows Yeshua is hungry. And so he says, if you're the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. And Yeshua says, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. He's quoting Deuteronomy 8:3, referring back to when the Israelites were in the desert and they were hungry, and depending on the Heavenly Father for their bread, for their sustenance and guidance. But I'll start in Deuteronomy 8:2. Remember how Yahweh Elohika, the Lord your God, led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. It's beautiful. Yeshua was perfect in his application about leading the people in the desert to test them, to see what was in the Israelites' hearts, to see what was in Yeshua's hearts. And as we see at the end of the story, Yeshua passes the test. Satan comes back with, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. That comes from Psalm 91:11 and 12. Yeshua comes back with, it is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test, which is a quote from Deuteronomy 6:16, which says, do not put Yahweh your Elohim to the test as you did at Massah, referring back again to the Israelites in the desert. But this verse comes right after a recap of the 10 Commandments and the Shema, and then it says, do not follow other gods, the gods of the people around you, For Yahweh your Elohim, who is among you, is a jealous El. Be sure to keep the commands of Yahweh your Elohim and the stipulations and decrees, so that it may go well with you. So once again, Yeshua, by quoting this, referring back to it, is affirming the Father's instructions so that it will go well with you. And he is obeying them so that it goes well with him. So then Satan offers Yeshua all the kingdoms if he'll just worship him. And I think this is the offer that Satan still offers to leaders and celebrities today, unfortunately. But Yeshua knew Psalm 2, 7 through 8, where the Father says, "You are my son, today I've begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession." So Yeshua responds, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only," which that could have been pulled from a variety of verses, Deuteronomy 10:20, Exodus 27. But notice, he told Satan to go away, and then Satan went away. Just as James tells us in James 4:7, "Submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." He could have done the things that Satan tempted him to do, but he was submitting himself to the Father's will. He continually said he came in the Father's name to do the Father's will and only spoke the words the Father gave him. So he wasn't going on his own plan, he was going on the Father's plan. He's reminding us of when the Israelites failed to do all of that, and then he's showing us this is how it's to be done. This is how you're to do it, to submit yourself to the Father and obey his instructions and walk in his will. So then let's move on to Paul. The very first quote I came across in Paul's story is also the strangest. Most of us know the story of him going on the road to Damascus, and the bright light comes, and then a voice speaks to him. This is also probably in a desert, which is interesting. He says, "I heard a voice saying to me in Hebrew, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the pricks.'" This is actually the strangest quote in the whole Bible. I'd always heard that it was from a Greek play, but last week I got curious, so I looked it up. It's from Bacchae by Euripides, and it's basically the story of a guy who thinks he's the son of Zeus, and so he thinks he's a god. And he's upset because the king won't worship him as a god, so he tricks the king and the king's mother and he whips these ladies up into a frenzy, including the king's mother, to tear her son, the king, limb from limb, put his head on a pole, and take it to her father as a prize. It's really bizarre. And that's what Yeshua quoted from. Another time, Paul asked several times for an angel of Satan to be taken away from him. And he says, Yeshua said back to him in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." But I thought we just said that if we resist the devil, he will flee from us. Ironically, the same people who quote that verse say that we are powerless to keep the law. But Paul says other place, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." But not that, not keep the law. Everything but keeping the Father's instructions. Moving on. Here's another quote from Acts 17:28. And I actually used to quote this one a lot because I thought it was kind of cool, until I learned where it was actually pulled from. "For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring," and then he goes on to make some point. But this is a quote from Aratus in Phenomena 5. And the quote from that Greek poet is, "We feel his spirit moving here and everywhere, and we his offspring are." So is Paul equating our God to Zeus? Which is weird. Let's move on to where Paul quotes the Old Testament. In Romans 13, he quotes several laws from Exodus 20, and then concludes, "He who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law." Really? Does loving other people fulfill the whole law? All of the Torah? What about having no other gods before me? Or bringing God's name to nothingness? Or guarding the Sabbath? And what did Yeshua say the greatest law was? Okay, I'll give you one more quote from the Old Testament. Paul quotes one of my favorite passages. It's Deuteronomy 30:9-14. So I'm going to read it from Deuteronomy first. Yahweh will again delight in you and make you prosperous, just as he delighted in your fathers, if you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim and keep his commands and decrees that are written in the book of the law, and turn to Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul. Now what I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in the heavens so that you have to ask, who will ascend into the heaven to get it and proclaim it so that we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it so that we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so that you may obey it. So how does Paul use this passage? In Romans 10:6, he says, but the righteousness that is by faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into the heaven? That is, to bring Christ down. Or who will descend into the deep? That is, to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith we are proclaiming, that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Is that what the passage in Deuteronomy was talking about? I'll just respond with Yeshua's words from Matthew 7:21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. That's a good passage to sit with for a while. So how does all this connect to Psalm 119? I'm glad you asked. I'm only going to quote one verse today to conclude. Verse 66, which is in the Tet section. So it's Tov ta'am vada'at lamedeni ki be mitzvoteka he'emanti. So it's good discernment and knowledge teach me, because in your commands I have believed or supported. So ta'am, discernment, is literally means taste. So it's really like perception, discernment, good sense, but really sensing what's going on. And da'at is usually translated knowledge, but it's more than just facts. It's really understanding, knowing what to do with those facts. So it's like good sense and discretion, understanding what to do in a situation, because I have believed your commands. But it's more than believed, because Aman is supported like a pillar. So I've supported through faithfulness, through actually faithfully doing what your commands are. This is exactly what Yeshua consistently demonstrates. Good discernment and perception, because he amans, supports, faithfully obeys the Father's instructions. And that's what we can get. We can get the same good discernment and perception when we follow Yeshua in all of the Father's instructions.